It's always dangerous to clap before a talk. It might be rubbish. But that's why you're sitting at the back so you can go, hasty getaway. Anyway, I'm really impressed. Thank you very much for inviting me, for one. And secondly, I can't believe what a hardy bunch you are in Eastbourne. It's a bitterly cold night, and I thought I'd be talking to nobody, which is why they brought the video along, so that I could then at least talk to you in the comfort of your warmth of your home. But you didn't know that till now, so don't go now. You'll just have to cope with the cold later. Right, okay, so it's great to be back. I was here almost exactly to the day 7 years ago, under very different circumstances. More of that later. And just very briefly about me, you've had a very small potted biography. So after a very, very brief career in the city, I worked on the Dorset Heritage Coast. That was my first sort of environmental conservation job. I then moved up to Suffolk and then came down to the South Downs. And for the last few decades, I've been campaigning and conserving on the South Downs. And as your person told you, I was the director of operations. I am now freelance, so anybody who wants to employ me, I'm willing to talk to you afterwards. But a lot of my work's voluntary. Okay, so without further ado, let's get on with the talk. So this is really the talk. It's in three parts, not very equal parts. There's the sort of the past, and I think it's really important that you get the context of the Eastbourne Downs. You probably know far more about the Eastbourne Downs than I do. But it does not help if I just ignore it. It does help massively to remind us all of why Eastbourne Council owns the Downs, I would say on your behalf as custodians, bought years ago. Anyway, then I'll talk about the sort of the now time, sort of 2015 onwards to about now, and then look to the future where, as it's just past Christmas and I can wish everybody a Happy New Year, well, that rather depends as far as Eastbourne Downs is concerned. So who wins, or what wins there, the threats or the opportunities? We shall see. Okay, so let's go back in time then. It's always difficult to know exactly when to start a talk about the Downs. You could go back 100 million years or whatever. That would be a very long talk. So anyway, I think really where the big pressures on our Downs started to happen and make a big difference was in the 1920s. Really sort of turn of the century onwards. In those days there were no laws, no planning laws, there was no protective designations, no national parks, nature reserves, all that sort of thing. So it was very much sort of cowboy country. And if you look at the picture on the left, that's Peacehaven. Now two guys walking over in those early days, walking over their lovely open countryside, virgin downland, were stunned and shocked and horrified when they saw lots of little bungalows and gridiron pattern of roads being sort of developed, which eventually became 4 miles wide and 1 mile deep, a great big bungaloid sprawl, which is now called Peacehaven. And it's pretty shocking, really. So they got together with their mates and they got together with some very influential people and said, look, this is terrible. Why isn't the government stopping this sort of thing? Well, there were no planning laws. There's, if you were the entrepreneur and you own the land, or you talk to the landowner about it and got to deal with them, build the houses. So what they did was they got together with these people, and Peacehaven number 2 came along. And Crowlink was the place between Eastbourne and Seaford. And what happened there was they got together with all these people. They formed the Society of Sussex Downsmen, 1923. Then called the South Downs Society, now called the Friends of the South Downs. Nationally too, it wasn't just the South Downs that was suffering these problems. So there was the the Council for the Preservation of Rural England, now called the Campaign to Protect Rural England. That was set up in 1926. And with those organisations, lots of influential people like Rudyard Kipling and others, all basically came together, spread a lot of awareness about the threats to the countryside, and to cut a long story short, raised public cash, and they bought out the developers at Crowlink. So that's why we still have a wonderful heritage coast unencumbered by housing, because of those pioneering people back in the 1920s. And that's what I would love to revisit 100 years on, as in now in the 2020s, because we sure as hell need it. Okay, so that's really a sort of a rural preservation movement that was going on in the countryside. Quite a middle-class campaign, really. Similarly, in other parts of the country, particularly where there were large private estates, i.e. very large people's back gardens, They were very concerned about the oiks coming out of the towns and everything like that, spoiling their back gardens, their grouse moors and shooting, etc. And if you were someone from Manchester or Sheffield or wherever, and you wanted to get out the mills, the factories, the mines, just for a nice bit of quiet, peaceful recreation, fill your lungs with clean air, at least one day a week, you were met by the private police forces, the gamekeepers and gillies and the private estates saying, in whatever accent is relevant to the part of the country, get off my land. And other organisations were set up at that time, such as the Ramblers Association, the Youth Hostels Association, very socially inclusive organisations encouraging and trying to promote access to the countryside, and also to lobby government to say, look, countryside access is rubbish. You know, we really must do something about this. You can't just stop people getting out just for a bit of quiet and formal recreation at the weekends. And government started to listen. They were interested in that rural preservation thing. Well, how are we going to protect our countryside, and how are we going to provide for this public access? Well, governments work in very, very slow, grinding wheels ways, and nothing happened, basically. So some local corporations, councils took it on their own backs to do something about it. So Worthing and Brighton and Eastbourne all basically petitioned Parliament. They all applied to get Acts of Parliament, and in 1926, Eastbourne got its Corporation Act, which basically meant that it acquired all of its open downland. And as you can see from the picture here, this is Eastbourne spreading westwards. This is East Dean hopping over the A259, spreading eastwards. And if you think about Peacehaven, everywhere from Newhaven to Peacehaven to Brighton to Hove to Shoreham, it's one huge urban sprawl. You haven't got that here. This is all open, thanks to Eastbourne Corporation acquiring the downland. Once they got the Act of Parliament, which was to secure the free and open use of the Downs in perpetuity, they then negotiated with the various landowners. These are all the little parcels of land of the different landowners, the Chatsworth Estate, Davis Gilbert and others. And in 1929, they acquired the Downs. So it is now the public Downs, your Downs, you own it. And I'd like to think that the Borough Council are the good custodians of your land, looking after it for your benefit. More of that later. Okay, so government wheels were turning slowly, but they were thinking about this rural preservation, what they were going to do about it, what they could do about countryside access. But then unfortunately something intervened called the Second World War. And the Second World War was an interesting time in the Downs, because where we were starving as a nation, where our food was coming across in convoys from America, from mainland Europe, they were being torpedoed by German U-boats, we were starving, we needed to produce more food ourselves. So we started to dig up our countryside, plough it up, but the Downs were largely spared due to the fact that the War Department requisitioned much of the Downs for military training. So basically barbed wire fences were put around it. This is Monty at Seaford Head, looking out across towards what would become the great D-Day landings a few years later. So lots of military training going on, so the Downs were largely protected. When I say protected, they were rather sort of shelled and shot at, but at least they stayed as that open downland and they weren't ploughed up. And also, government remembered the pre-war rural preservation movement, remembered that countryside access need, and so they did a big propaganda campaign saying, it's your country, fight for it now, with a kind of implicit promise that when the troops came back to Britain, there would be this lovely protected countryside for them, full of open access. So it was a wonderful opportunity. You know, you went out there, it was a morale booster to keep you going, fighting for your country. And this is a fantastic little picture, sort of a composite, three different pictures made up. So it's not a real photo or a real artist's picture, but it's made up of three different parts. Sort of an idealised picture looking from above the hills at East Dean, across to Burling Manor Farm, out towards Belden and Shooter's Bottom, towards the coast. It's a great poster. And it just sums it all up completely. Anyway, not only was the government thinking about the war effort, it was thinking about, well, what would happen after the war, assuming we won. Then, so there was lots of committees that were meeting about various things post-war. One of them was about this access and protection of the countryside. 1941, 1945, culminating in a 1947 Hobhouse report, and this is Hobhouse's map. And they came up with a very simple concept and said, okay, so where are the areas in Britain which are of great natural beauty, close to centres of population? Put those two together and we will protect that countryside and provide public access on it. And they were the criteria that were used then for the founding national parks that came along in the 1950s with the 49 National Parks and Access to the Countryside Act. And so these dark green bits, and there's some really good examples here. This is the Peak District. Peak District National Park. So you have the Kinder Scout mass trespass, which I showed you on the earlier slide in 1932. And there's Manchester, there's Sheffield, there's all the Stoke and the Potteries. Millions of people living around the Peak District, and a fantastically beautiful Peak District National Park in the middle. So there is a national park in waiting because it meets the criteria perfectly. Brecon Beacons, with its mining towns and villages, with Newport and Cardiff and Swansea to the south of it. So again, a great candidate. And of course you've got the South Downs, with all its coastal conurbations, London. These days you're talking about 10 million people or so living within an hour's travel time of the South Downs. I mean, it's a very, very popular piece of countryside. So again, another ideal national park candidate. Bad news for the South Downs was that after the war, by the time they cleared all the munitions, got rid of all the barbed wire, cleared all the military stuff away, the farmers got going on the land again and looked at what they'd done in the rest of the country and said, crikey guys, we better catch up. So they did, they caught up, they ploughed up lots of the downs, grew lots of food, fantastic stuff, really good stuff, just what our country needed post-war. But the downside of it was that in 1956, 3 national park commissioners came down. They had a lovely holiday. They were going around visiting all these dark green spots, saying, oh yeah, like that, Snowdonia, lovely place, we'll have that as a national park. Brecon Beacons, like that. Dartmoor, like that. South Downs, dodgy, dodgy. It may still have its natural beauty, but as far as we're concerned, it's lost its opportunity for open air recreation because of the extensive ploughing. Pre-war, post-war, same picture. This is basically looking towards Lewes here, and this is it all ploughed up after the war. So it was struck off the list. And luckily for Eastbourne, it already had its Eastbourne Corporation Act, so there was no more development up on the downs. This is about the 300-foot contour mark. And basically what happened was the housing came up to this point. All this is now owned by you, by Eastbourne Corporation, Eastbourne Borough Council, and that's the end of the housing. And then this was just left, so it eventually scrubbed over and became an ash woodland. And then on top, they had 4 farms, and those farms carried on farming. And the Eastbourne Corporation Act really was about controlling that development successfully, protecting the water supply because the chalk aquifer was where you get your water from, and also providing for public access. But what it didn't do, of course, was they rather forgot the purpose of why they bought the Eastbourne Downs. So post-war, they started to intensify the agriculture, so those opportunities for public access, the pollution of the water supply, all started to get worse and worse because they forgot why the downs had been acquired in the first place. So the agricultural intensification continued, and the recreation demands continued and grew, and without any countryside management or any means of controlling or guiding that recreational pressures, those pressures got worse and the damage got worse. Okay, let's scroll forward to the 1980s and 90s. Another enlightening council at the time, East Sussex County Council, they acquired Exeat Farm. Exeat Farm was a really horrible, run-down caravan park and campsite full of just tat everywhere, rubbish, septic tanks and corrugated iron, all sorts of rubbish. It just looked an absolute mess. Anyway, so they acquired the land, cleared it completely and turned it into Seven Sisters Country Park, which is just a beautiful place. So there you got your wonderful natural beauty and people enjoying that country park area. At the same time, they took the enlightened view of setting up a South Downs conservation project, which is where I come in. So my colleague Paul, sadly no longer with us, and me, that's a very young me when I didn't have any grey hair, we were the two project officers who then looked at the downs across the East Sussex to see what we could do to try and enhance that downland. And of course, one of the things we looked at was Eastbourne. We said, well, hang on a minute, all this land is owned by Eastbourne Council on behalf of its people. That should be an easy win here. So we went and sat down with Eastbourne Council, and they were brilliant. They were so receptive. I thought they might be, good, you know, get off my land. But no, they weren't. They were sort of saying, oh, you've got some very interesting ideas, Phil, Paul. Let's sit down and talk. Anyway, so we said, well, look, there's a couple of problems. One is you've got really badly polluted water supplies. You're spending a fortune cleaning up the water before it gets into people's taps. Otherwise, well, they wouldn't be very well. Secondly, you've got a problem with agriculture because you're ploughing your downs right up to the cliff edge. You can just about make out the sort of the white or the light brown there of the soil, or the chalk rather, going right up to the cliff edge. And the only bits of grass that are left are these bits right on the edge where any farmer who's sane would not go and plough right along the cliff edge when you've got a 500-foot drop next door to you. So all the actual really good rare habitat, and chalk grassland is probably the most diverse habitat of Northwest Europe. It's very, very rare, it's internationally important, and it holds a terrific diversity of wildlife. But it was very fragmented because of all the arable fields in between it, more and more land being ploughed up, and it was just sitting there on the cliff edge. And with coastal erosion, it was slowly disappearing into the sea. So over the next 40 or 50 years, you would have no chalk grassland left at all, but just very intensive arable fields. So Eastbourne agreed that they needed a management plan for the Downs, so we helped them write their first management plan, which was then renewed or revised and updated every few years, which is good news. But better than that, what they also did was they took back in hand Bullock Down Farm, the coastal farm, the farm that's in that picture there, and they reverted it all back to grassland. So overnight, all of that archaeology and the cultural heritage of Eastbourne is incredibly rich. Your history under your feet is phenomenal. You know, get an archaeologist to give you a talk. It's brilliant. It's breathtaking. And this is just these red lines are all the old medieval field systems. Within that picture, I wasn't going to show a great big picture of it, but there's all the Iron Age stuff. There's the stuff that's much earlier than that. There's a wealth of archaeology under your feet. Trouble is, when it was being ploughed, it's like ploughing out, destroying layer after layer. So you take the first 100 years off, the second 100 years off, the third 100 years off, and so it goes on, till eventually there's nothing left. And it's not that they're ploughing any deeper, but because the Downs is on a slope, every time they plough, of course, the soil runs away, the chalk and flints get exposed, they run down the hillside, so effectively you're ploughing deeper and deeper and deeper, destroying all your history, all your cultural heritage. So putting it back to permanent grassland was brilliant, protected the archaeology overnight. It also joined up all those fragments of grassland so that then species could move around, and with climate change it's really important that stuff can move so that we actually keep a good health of our wildlife. And eventually you will get good chalk grassland back over many, many years. So we can recover it, and it is being recovered, which is brilliant news. No chemicals being used, which again is good for your water supply because the chemicals leach straight down into this wonderful big chalk sponge and sadly ends up in your drinking water supply if it weren't for the fact that you pay through your water rates a fortune in cleaning up the water before you get it through your taps. So you pay twice basically, once to pollute the water in the first place through our agriculture policies, and then secondly to our water companies to clean it up afterwards. It's pretty crazy. Okay, that's the good news. And then I got a job. I moved to West Sussex to carry on doing what I'd been doing in East Sussex over in West Sussex. So I suppose I better be honest here, I kind of took my eye off the ball a bit. So sadly, there's the entirety of the Eastbourne Downland. And so what they did at Bullock Down, I just naively assumed they would then move on to look at Cornish Farm, then Black Robin Farm, then Chalk Farm, and over time all the downs would be addressed. So they'd look at Bullock Down and say, yes, this is what we need to do here, what do we need to do at Cornish, what do we need at Black Robin, what do we need at Chalk, everything great. Didn't happen. And so consequently what happened was, not just in Eastbourne, but in other parts of the world, the agricultural intensification continued. Not in Eastbourne, but in other parts of the world, development pressures continued. You've got things like Twyford Down, which was the worst road disaster ever. It just basically cut straight through the downland, destroying scheduled ancient monuments, that cultural heritage, destroying internationally important wildlife sites, that chalk grassland. And I just thought it was an absolutely heinous crime. It really was. Recreational demands increased. I mean, Beachy Head gets, over 1 million people a year. There's no ranger up there. There was nobody to control and manage it, no interpretation. I mean, these are things that are crying out for some custodianship. Agricultural policy. I mean, it got worse and worse and worse with the Common Agricultural Policy. More and more intensive farming, more and more wheat mountains and milk lakes and all the rest of it you heard about in the 1970s and 80s. And the chalk grassland, remember the chalk grassland, this internationally important chalk grassland? Well, if you've got very good eyesight, there it is, on less than 4% of the entire South Downs. So we've destroyed virtually all of it, and there's just 4% left. But we can get it back, but anyway, that's later. One of the things, another little campaign we ran was we lobbied government and in turn the EU to say, look, the Common Agricultural Policy is not really doing what it should be doing, what it says on the tin. It's actually not good for the rural economy, it's destroying wildlife, it's damaging landscape, it's totally wrecking the archaeology. And fortunately, other countries felt the same. There was a big lobby EU, big lobby UK, and we got a result. And there was a U-turn in agricultural policy. The bad news was that the government only chose 5 areas in the whole country to be environmentally sensitive areas. And this is where you come in, because that lobby to save the Downs was phenomenally successful. The public wrote to the government, they wrote to what was then the Ministry of Agriculture, they wrote to their MPs, they wrote to everybody. They just lobbied like mad, and when I went up to Whitehall for meetings, they said, it's very impressive, we get more lobbying letters for the South Downs than all the other areas put together, which is brilliant. And Paul and I thought, this is great. I was in West Sussex, he's in East Sussex. We said, look, we've kind of we haven't cracked it because only about 25% of farmers agreed to go into this voluntary environment sensitive area scheme. So we still have 75% problem across the Downs, which will probably never be resolved because there'll always be some farmers who want to carry on being very intensive agribusiness people, but other farmers who would prefer to sort of like become more custodians, guardians of that landscape, working with the grain of nature, as our king said while he was Prince of Wales. So we used that lobby and said, look, we've kind of ignited the people passion for the Downs. It was there in the 1920s, it was largely then lost, but it's still there latently, dormant. We've just woken them up. So what we did was we actually relaunched a national park campaign, which is a pretty mad thing to do because most of the establishment bodies, the CPRE, the Sussex Wildlife Trust, loads of others just said, you're mad, you guys, you're absolutely mad, you're never going to get a national park. It's already been rejected, forget it. So we spent the next 4 or 5 years raising public profile, raising awareness, doing badges which said South Downs the next national park, being on the telly, being on the radio, everything, just really lobbying like mad. And people started to listen. The people started to listen. And once the people listened and started to respond, then those establishment organisations, those preservation bodies, conservation organisations, they said, actually, yeah, maybe there's something in this. So eventually, some 160 organisations came together to fight a South Downs National Park campaign. And this is a talk in itself, but basically that's it. So from the 1920s all the way through to 2011, finally, the South Downs did become a national park, having been rejected in the 1950s. Great, so there's a good story, happy ending. Eastbourne Borough Council owns the Downs on your behalf, and it's protected by national park status. I can go home now, can't I? All sorted. Okay, so rather belatedly, what is the Eastbourne Downs? Okay, so the Eastbourne Downs is this lump of land here. Everything within Eastbourne Borough, which is not built on, up on top of the hills there, is the Eastbourne Downs. It is basically comprised of, as the council calls it, open downland, which is the sort of the Beachy Head strip, the Butts Brow bit at the top, and the wooded fringe that runs down the side. And then there are the 4 farms, Bullock Down, Cornish Farm, Black Robin Farm and Chalk Farm at the top there. So over 3/4 of it is farmland, and then about 1/4 of it is then this, quotes, open downland. And I just want to remind people of what it's written in Hansard back in 1926. It's Eastbourne Corporation Act, Eastbourne Borough Council's desire to preserve the beauty spot in its existing condition without being fenced in, or ploughed up, or built upon, and to secure the free and open use of the Downs in perpetuity. And the rhetorical question for you is, in perpetuity, how long is that? 10 years? Any advance on 10 years? 20? 30? Nah, don't be stupid. There's no such thing as forever. Look in the Eastbourne English Dictionary. In perpetuity means less than 100 years. Okay? Now there, a bit of education for you there. Eastbourne Borough Council, we're going to flog it all off in 2015. So that's how long in perpetuity lasts. From 1926 to 2015, what's that, 89 years? There you go. Now you know what the definition of in perpetuity is. In perpetuity is 89 years. Okay, so I've got Secret Santa on there because, well, my family decided this year that they wanted to do a Secret Santa. We've never done it before. And I thought, actually, it's just after Christmas now. I've just wished everybody a Happy New Year. And in a way, Eastbourne Borough Council's like Secret Santa, except they're a kind of reverse Secret Santa, which is why I put the little robber mask on. Because what they did, they went down your chimneys in 2015 and they emptied all your stockings of your goodies, all that lovely downland, and they went back at your chimney and they said, right, we've just got a load of stash here, guys, let's flog it off. And the sad thing is, they did it all in secret. And I don't know, you probably are completely aware of how the council works. In Brighton, we have a very bureaucratic committee structure approach. So there's lots of committees, lots of public meetings, lots of public galleries and stuff like that. And it's very bureaucratic, but it's very democratic. In Eastbourne, you have sort of your backbench councillors, and then you have your cabinet, which are the lead members for different portfolios, like environmental, housing or whatever. And those 6 people make an awful lot of decisions, and it's up to them whether they make those decisions in public or in private. And in their wisdom, they decided that they would decide in private to sell the Downs. So, will we get away with it? Yeah, of course they can. Nobody's interested, just a bit of downland up there, nobody's giving notice. They didn't actually consult anybody about this, so 6 people made a decision. We even spoke to some councillors about it afterwards, and even they, the other backbench councillors, didn't know about it. That's how horrifying it is. And I find it quite depressing, actually, that something as important as the open downland, the 4,200 acres of land, which was bought by Act of Parliament in perpetuity, was decided to be sold in private, which is just dreadful. They didn't even consult you about it or even tell you about it. Anyway, fortunately, the nice thing about working in conservation is you get a lot of moles, whistleblowers, whatever, and they leak information out because they've got moral consciences and they're very concerned. So we found out about it from an insider and said, just to let you know, they're thinking of flogging the Downs off. Well, that was great. That lit the blue touch paper. So what we did was we spoke to the, I was on the telly, I was on the radio, I got the papers to do things, social media, came into Eastbourne to give talks to people like the Eastbourne Society, the Friends of the Earth, the Sussex Wildlife Trust Regional Group, just anything really, just to spread the word. And it was fantastic, and it wasn't just me. As soon as I spoke to somebody else, they then got going, and then they'd speak to somebody else, and then they got going. So there was these huge street demonstrations. They were so bad, good, whatever you want to call it, so popular that the police had to turn up and control the traffic and control the rowdy anarchists of Eastbourne. We had guided walks up on the Downs to spread awareness about the Downs so that people could say, did you know this is your Downs, you own it all? And people said, no, do we? I said, yes, you own it. Oh, but not for much longer because your council's going to flog it all off. No, are they? So lots of awareness being spread, badges being made, lovely stuff in the papers there. Once you've sold the family silver, what's left? Exactly, my point entirely. So lots of good stuff. Big protests outside the town hall. Lovely. This is so not Eastbourne, it really isn't. Okay, so, and having praised Eastbourne Borough Council massively for what they did in the 1980s with Bullet Down Farm, which is brilliant, and I make no apologies if there's any councillors in the room, but this is probably the most appalling slide I will ever put on. I mean, really, it's an 18R slide. I just find this horrendous, this picture. It's the most pornographic picture I've ever put up on any talk. It's just full of propaganda, which is just rubbish, basically. And I was so appalled that the misinformation, they call it now fake news, don't they? That's being put out by the council. The good news was, though, whenever the council said, oh, no, we're not selling the Downs. No, we're just selling some scruffy bits of farmland, just miles away. You won't even notice it. No, you're selling 3/4 of your downland, which you bought in perpetuity for the people. And then they came up with another excuse. And every time, we counted it. And so where they said myth versus reality, as far as I was concerned, it was their myth, our reality. They put stuff in the papers, Downland Farms, the big questions answered, their big questions answered in their way. Anyway, each time we counted it, and then they came with the final ace up their sleeve, and they said, aha, gotcha. We don't want these organisations like CPRE, Sussex Wildlife Trust, Friends of the Earth. This is not about this. It's not about some long-haired anarchist from Brighton. I think that's meant to be me. All these outsiders coming in, all these big all sorts of... This is the Eastbourne Downs. This is the people's Downs. They should decide. Not all you establishment bodies, not all you blooming charities. It's the people's Downs. So we're going to have a referendum. So we said, okay, fine. So we'll sit down with you, and it's a bit like political parties, you know, you put your case, we'll put our case. Oh, no. This is Eastbourne people. We're going to put the case to the Eastbourne people and get them to vote. Which is kind of worrying, really, because they produced their council rag, their Eastbourne Review local paper, which goes into all the houses. And it was the most blatant piece of propaganda that I'd seen in a long time. And not my words, the Eastbourne Herald's words, council accused of blackmail. So what they said basically was, so you read the newsletter and you thought, appalling, yes, well, terrible, oh, dear. And at the very end of it, there's this little poll. So they didn't do a referendum, they did a little poll. And in the poll it said, okay, do you want to sell some scruffy bits of farmland? And we'll get some money in, we'll stick that in the council coffers, that'd be great. But if you don't let us do it, we will cut your community grants. We will stop your rubbish collections. We will charge you more for collecting waste. We will reduce all the cutting of the verges. We will cut back on grounds maintenance. We will think of things that the public really like. I don't know, just think of something. So, but what I was so impressed about was that the people of Eastbourne are not thick people. They're very intelligent people, and they saw through this, I can't use the word bullshit, can I? I just did, sorry. This propaganda, and they voted to say no, which is brilliant. And in March 2017, and because I'd been sort of boxed out of the picture by the council because I'm this outsider, one of the tactics I used was to write to my MP and various other people. So there was a whole stock of letters that came back, standard form of letters that came back from the council to the MPs and various other people with the result. And they basically said, and you probably can't read it, you don't need to read it, but they basically said the vast majority of people voted in the poll they didn't want the Downlands sold off, so the sale's off. So we won. Brilliant. End of story. So that's good news. So we have got the national park, you still own the Downs. That's good. However, I just finished with the future, if you like, the threats and then the opportunities. The threats, well, either selling it or badly managing it are both bad problems. So, for example, Mary Farm in Brighton was sold off in the last century, and that was bought by an investment bank. The investment bank let it to a very, very intensive agri-business farmer, and he basically ploughed up all the downland. It's very, very intensively farmed. It pollutes the water supply. There's no wildlife up there anymore. It's in a very, very bad, degraded state, terrible soil erosion, etc. Lots and lots of chemicals going on the land, big lots of inputs put in to get big lots of outputs out in their wheat, barley, oilseed, rape, linseed, whatever. Another one here, salt bean and rotting in urban fringes, basically just very, very intensive horticulture. So lots of like little paddocks, so a bit of a landscape eyesore to put it mildly, huge overgrazing, poor ponies which are suffering because there's hardly any grass left, RSPCA, nightmare for them, real headache for them every so often. Or you could have, in parts, very, very further intensification. This is kind of viticulture coming in. Huge big sheds, great big sort of horticultural fields, if you like, and there's a danger, either with the land being sold off or being badly managed, that you will be restricted then, from a public access point of view, just to those public rights of way, which historically were very important for you to go from your little hamlet to your church on Sundays, or whatever, but they're not really fit for purpose today. So it's quite nice at Eastbourne that you've got, for example, on the coast, you've got open access, there's the sort of rights of way, it gives you open access land, and you've got an opportunity with Eastbourne Borough Council land, the 4,000 acres, to open up more areas, quality access where you want to have your nice circular walks or whatever you want to do. And finally, now we're out the EU, one of the good things about the Eastbourne Downlands management plans is that they encouraged farmers to go into the agri-environment schemes, so the environment sensitive area scheme, which then became countryside stewardship, environmental stewardship. And now we're at the EU, of course, all these agreements are coming to an end. You can see here 22, 23, 24. Governments move slowly, and we still don't know the final small print of what the new post-EU agri-environment schemes are going to be, how much they're going to benefit or not the farmers. So the worry is that farmers may not sign up for these agri-environment schemes if the conditions aren't good enough for them or they find out about them too late. So that's not going to be good for our environment if they're not going to take up the grants and sign the agreements for good environmental management. The longer term threats are also pretty serious. So there's that big viticulture I was talking to you about. You've got your bottling plants, you've got your grape pressing, you've got your big industrial scale commercial wine making enterprises, and wildlife can easily get squeezed out, public access and all the rest of it. You've got things like big pop festivals, okay, not perhaps on a Glastonbury scale, but pretty big nevertheless. This is Boomtown on the Hampshire Downs, just to the east of Winchester. The National Park Authority is not the licensing authority, that's your local council. And in this case, Winchester licenses the Boomtown Festival, which has a long history of very serious illegal drug taking, quite bad medical problems, etc. And I'm not sure how that fits in with quiet informal recreation on the Downs when you've got huge traffic congestion, noise and all the rest of it. But anyway, maybe I'm just being a boring old fart. And then you've got urban fringe pressures as housing grows and grows and grows. And Eastbourne here, this is south of the road. South of the road here, this is the development boundary of Eastbourne, when 2016 planning application approved to extend the development beyond the development line. So, there's no such thing as total preservation. You've just got to be very, very wary and on the ball, eyes and ears open. And one of the things that Eastbourne Council said when they were going to sell the Downs, once it became public, was just, don't worry about it. It's okay. We have covenants on the land, so it's protected. Brilliant. Now, a lot of covenants I could just tear up in front of you now because there are so many loopholes. Just employ a good lawyer and you can just run a coach and horses through them. And I'm just very happy that Eastbourne Downs wasn't sold because I don't think those covenants were very good at all, if they even existed in any proper form. But we never found that out because, again, everything was done in secret. Anyway, as far as Brighton's concerned, there was a public inquiry about Brighton Marina. And Brighton Marina was approved then. The inspector recommended that he agreed with the pro people, but he had also listened to the objectors and said, yes, I appreciate your big concerns here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to put covenants on the marina to keep it as a marina. So it's basically going to have, yes, some housing, some retail, but mainly it is, a boating marina with some housing in it. So So there it is, looks great, doesn't it? So it's all very contained, and one of the covenants conditions very clearly states that you keep the housing below the line of the cliff height, because that keeps it nice and contained, fairly low key. Housing of 2 or 3 stories or 4 stories high, fantastic, job done. Then a planning application came in for that, to which, no problem, we've got the covenants. But the developers went back to court and said, these covenants, to use my words, aren't worth the paper they're written on. And surprise, surprise, they weren't. So these have already been built, and these, I guess, waiting for the economy to pick up, waiting for the funding streams to be more accessible. We will then have the rest of these. And every single one of these, all of them, from the 12-storey ones right up to the 40-storey ones, are all much, much higher than the cliffs. So much for covenants. The latest craze, and I'm very pro renewable energy, crikey, we so need to get rid of all our fossil fuels and really address climate change. I've got solar panels on my roof, that's a little start, I don't drive a car. So solar panels, solar parks, solar farms, whatever, they're all the rage, which is great. So, for example, Hastings have had a fantastic strategy they produced, which was basically a renewable energy strategy. So the idea was that over time, they would turn Hastings into a sort of like a net zero town. And the idea was that they would retrofit what remaining council housing they had with solar panels. They would talk to big business about grey water recycling, ground source heat pumps, blah, 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 whatever. They would talk with the county council about putting solar panels and other stuff on the highways infrastructure, the lampposts, the rest of it. So all great stuff. And then they thought, hang on a minute, this is going to cost us money. We own some land. What we could do, stick it on the land, it would cost us nothing. And we'll make it a terrific income from the solar panels. Job done. The land in question is Hastings Country Park, which is really the place that the people like to go for their quiet and formal recreation. Okay, maybe not from the mines and the factories and the mills, but certainly from away from their supermarket shopping or their inboxes full of emails or their stuffy offices or whatever. Anyway, another little campaign followed, and fortunately Hastings then said, okay, it's a fair cop, we've perhaps got that a bit wrong. Interestingly, Brighton are also thinking about renewable energy and being carbon neutral, and they've done a good job to start with. They are retrofitting at the moment another 150 council homes. There's hardly any council homes left now, but anyway, what they've got, they are retrofitting with solar panels, but there is some rumours going around about putting solar panels up on the Brighton Downs. And you also locally have got your Eastbourne Levels, your own, very own solar park, which may come to you. And I'm not going to, this is not a talk about the Levels, this is about the Downs, but I just thought I'd mention it because it's just down the road from you. So Eastbourne Levels, I mean, you need to look at that. Is it good? Is it a bad thing? What's it going to do for the landscape? What's it going to do for wildlife? What's it going to do for public access? I don't know. It's your town, they're your levels. Well, it's chat with the state levels, but you know what I mean. It's in your domain, in your area, in your bailiwick. So anyway, you ought to look at that and see what you think. Okay, so there's the threats gone. Let's look at opportunities. So there's a lovely slide, lovely poster that, or panel that the National Park Authority put up about the sort of natural capital of the Downland. So all that sort of like all the good things that come out of the Downs. So it's your clean water supply, it's your fresh air. You're going out for your health and well-being, your mental and physical well-being. It might be about it's about the wildlife. It's about all the archaeology. It's about again clean water, as I say. The chalk grassland, the local food, all the fantastic opportunities that you can get from the Downs without damaging or destroying it. So it's a really good thing, and all these things, as I said, Bullock Down Farm, other parts of the Downs, ecotourism, 1 million plus people go to Beachy Head every year. How much of that car park income comes back onto the Downs? There's a question to ask your council. All those tourist facilities, which are all around the Eastbourne Downlands area, it's a wonderful captive market for attracting people in, for raising income, etc. Back in the 1980s and 90s, they produced these lovely interpretation panels, so again, spreading awareness about the Downs, encouraging people to enjoy and respect the Downland. Back in the sort of wartime days, there was even a Downland Ranger, a Downland Ranger, or rather it's actually a mounted policeman, but no, great guy. When you get home, not necessarily tonight, but go onto Google and look up Pathé News, Eastbourne Downland Ranger, and there's a black and white one and a colour one, and it's just Henry Ward and some guy Paul. They were the two Downland Rangers who were featured in this film. It's a wonderful film. Just do it for sort of like historic, cultural significance. It's a lovely thing to watch. It's only about 4 or 5 minutes long. And then in the 1890s, when we pricked that conscience about the purposes, they employed another ranger, Eastbourne Borough Council. So all credit to them, fantastic. And then later we got the cuts, so no Downland Ranger anymore. And the two things that the Eastbourne Downs needs, your Eastbourne Downs needs, one is sympathetic land management. So protect the archaeology, conserve wildlife, clean drinking water, quality public access, etc., etc. And it needs a ranger. Well, it needs a person that you can talk to. There is nobody at the council. They're in the council as sort of like bureaucrats in the office. They're signing papers. They're letting contracts out for grass mowing. You don't have a contact on the ground. You don't have a contact who understands the wildlife of Eastbourne so it doesn't get mown at the wrong time of year. You don't have a person on the ground who can talk to the public so that they can respect the Downs better and enjoy it more, etc. So they're the two things that I think are absolutely fundamental. So the Downs were saved in the 1920s, and there's a sort of just a pre-Downland acquisition picture, sheep in a Downland dew pond in Eastbourne, and then after the Downland sale was stopped, the National Park Authority moved in and said to Eastbourne, right, okay, you've got your little management plans, you did a bit of Bullock Down Farm, but you really need to do a lot more. So we'll help you write a much broader whole estate plan. So go onto Google again and get a copy of the whole estate plan. It's about 50, 60 pages long. And it's a lovely Bible to have that you can quote back at the council to get them to do more for our Downs, your Downs. And that's 1923. This is 2023. And what worries me, and the reason I've deliberately masked this picture out because it's just a little bit savage really for a talk. But this is the modern, if you like, the very intensive part. So where you've got grass, it's lovely, but then every few years it's only a temporary lay, it gets ploughed up, and then again, of course, that's going to affect your water supply, it's going to adversely affect the wildlife, etc., and the landscape. Well, this I've masked it with is, there's probably a very similar population across the whole of the South Downs, so it's largely an empty landscape, from Winchester all the way to Eastbourne, as Eastbourne itself. I think you've got a population of nearly 100,000, and the whole of the South Downs has got a population of just over 100,000. There's a thing called a community infrastructure levy, which comes from developers when they want to develop in the countryside or in the towns. And last year, the South Downs National Park Authority raised £2.5 million, which all gets ploughed back, sorry, not ploughed, bad word, all gets reinvested in the Downland for restoring dew ponds, restoring the landscape, providing quality public access, etc., etc. So, if they can get £2.5 million out of a community infrastructure levy, how much does Eastbourne get? Does it have a community infrastructure levy? Where does the money go? Does any of it get back into the Downs? Good question to ask the council. And there's a lovely little model there, really, because this is the Downs in the 1930s. So all that yellow and light green is all what was then the permanent grassland, all that chalk grass, that internationally rare chalk grass, and very important habitat. You could take that model and say, okay, well, there's the starting point. Let's recover, let's restore, let's recreate some of this traditional downland for the good of wildlife, the good of archaeology, the good of the landscape, improve public access, etc. And one of the things that came after the Eastbourne Downland campaign was the Eastbourne Downland Group was set up. And the Eastbourne Downland Group, with other people, got Tim Smith, the sort of guru of the Eden project, to come along to Eastbourne and enthuse the councillors and others of Eastbourne and turn them on to some great ideas, which is brilliant. So we get all these international experts and other people with some knowledge to really explain to Eastbourne how they can really use the Downs more imaginatively and in a better way for the good of the Downs and for the good of the revenue and the resources of the town. And the Eastbourne Down, this sort of Eden concept isn't really about geodesic domes, it's about this. It's about building relationships in people in the natural world. It can be done in a number of different ways, like a bit like what I said about the ranger earlier, the ranger being that link between the people, the farmers, the downs, the council, etc. And you don't need geodesic domes in Eastbourne because you've got an information centre at Beachy Head, next door to the pub. And behind that, or in front of that, to the south of it, underneath is a massive underground bunker. I've been down it. I'm not kidding you, you can drive double-decker buses down it, it's that big. Well, with that sort of money, with the money from, say, the lottery, with money from other funding sources, there's no reason why you couldn't do an Eden and actually start to do some really great creative things on the Downs. That underground bunker would make a great place to encourage people to use the area. It would open up something else. It would just bring in more tourism money, which is what the council says it claims it needs, etc. So there's a lot of stuff you can do. So let's look at something that have been done then to finish. So this is Worthing. Worthing Borough Council also bought its downs back in the 1920s and 30s because of the development pressures, water pollution and public access. So in 2002 it flogged off the bit in the middle, like good old days when they were flogging stuff off. That was the golf course gone. But then a more enlightened council, especially when we found out about it, because a lot of this was fairly secret, they then lost the farmer. He died. And so we sat down with Worthing Borough Council and said, look, okay, all this farm here, you could turn it back, restore it to grassland. Eventually it would become good permanent grassland, good chalk grassland. It's going to protect the archaeology, it's going to be clean up the water supply, etc. You could provide it with full public open access. And they agreed. And a tenant farmer came in and said, yep, okay, I can buy into that. He grazes his sheep and his cows on there. There's a good relationship with the public and the farmer. It all works terrifically well. So well, in fact, that they're now looking at the west side of the Worthing Downs, and they've got this renaturing or rewilding project, starting with the aim starting this year in 2024, subject to raising the funds from various sources, through to 2026. So that's all your Worthing Downs cracked. Brighton Downs, somewhat late in the day, they've also now produced a whole estate plan. And so it's only just really been endorsed last year by the National Park Authority. Then of course there were the local elections, that's delayed everything, but they've now got a Downland Advisory Panel, which I sit on, as you know, because that was my introduction. We are looking at it's much bigger land than yours. They've got about 13,000 acres, about 3 or 4 times the size. We're looking at farm by farm, piece of land by piece of land, to see how we can make improvements like Bullock Down on the Brighton Downs. Early days, don't judge them yet, let's see what happens. Let's turn back to Eastbourne then, your downs, our downs. So Bullock Down Farm, that's 1990s that was done. Future, there's another thing called biodiversity net gain. As I said, governments work very slowly. So we've known since really the 1960s that wildlife's been in decline. It's never recovered. Okay, you get the odd bird species which gets better and another animal that does really well, but overall, take the whole biodiversity, it goes down and down and down and down and down every year. But you've got the opportunity now, government's got this thing called Biodiversity Net Gain, which comes in now, it's live this year. So when a developer is going to stick his development on it, he puts his planning application in and says, right, I'm going to cover this piece of grassland, I'm going to drain this pond to put a car park in, I'm going to knock down these 10 trees, whatever. So for everything he or she does, there's got to be a gain made. Now, very often that development it doesn't have enough room on it to provide that biodiversity net gain. So it's got to be put somewhere else. So very often what they do is they commute payment. So they say there's a very complex metric which they work out. So simplistically, if they've destroyed a pond, then they stick 2 ponds in somewhere else, so there's a gain. Or they knock 10 trees down, they put 100 trees in because they're little ones and they're going to grow up over time. But if they can't do it, then they commute a sum of money. So it's a bit like the community infrastructure levy money. So there's an opportunity, for example, at Chalk Farm, where the farm is quite sympathetic, that money that comes from developments in Eastbourne or a surrounding area could be used then to restore the downland at Chalk Farm. So there's an opportunity, an example. But you've already got one. You've already got 11 million quid coming in from the central government. Good old government. That's the Levelling Up Fund. 11 million quid for the Towner Art Gallery to stick its Towner Art Gallery out on the downland. Now, I think it's great. It's a really good project for art, for the community, for encouraging that sort of relationship and contact with art in its downland setting. So think about Revilius paintings, that's all about that lovely countryside. However, you could argue it's all about commercial tourism, it's all about car parking, it's all about, look at how well they do at Beachhead, how much money they can make. We can do the same thing at Black Robin. And it's not really about kicking the farmer out at Black Robin Farm and turn it into a commercial tourism attraction. It should really be about, if you're going to take a urban development, i.e. the Towner, and stick it up in the open downland in the national park, then there really does have to be some landscape and biodiversity gain and public access gain. But although the plans have some great things said about the buildings, so they're going to restore the buildings very sympathetically, and in new buildings will be done in keeping with the buildings that are already there. They're going to provide these arts, they're going to provide cafes and all that, lovely sort of facilities for the public. What they're going to do actually there, they're going to provide a bus service. They put 2 new bus stops, they're putting 2 new bus stops in. So, it sounds great. But it's still an urban development being translocated into a rural setting in a national park. What are they doing about all of the land? So that's the actual farm buildings in the middle here. What about all this great mauve area here? What a fantastic landscape opportunity, 11 million quid. You could employ a ranger for that for probably about 200 years. But you could certainly put some money into having somebody on the ground. You could certainly put some money into that landscape. However, when you go through all the various documents, there is one document that talks about the agricultural, i.e. the farmland, as opposed to the buildings. And there's no mention of the whole estate plan, the Bible, which is your Eastbourne Downland Bible for improving that area. Instead, that's what's written. We will improve it. We will come out of our agri-environment schemes, our environmental stewardship schemes. We will make the land more productive. We will plough up more land. So everything that we've been trying to do, everything that's in that whole estate plan, is all possibly going to be reversed if the planning application goes through like that. And I just think that is just not right. Okay, so I finish because you should look at those planning applications. You should comment on those planning applications and support them or object to them depending on your views. And my key thing is that there is the Eastbourne Corporation Act securing the free and open use of the Downs in perpetuity, i.e. for you. You own it, they are the custodians of it. It's your council, it's your Downs, it's your choice. And it's so important that you get involved and keep an eye on what the council's doing, go up onto the Downs and just basically keep on and on at them. And you've already had the great public protest, so the council knows the passion that people have in Eastbourne for their Downs. But 2 things that really worry me. One is complacency, and we're all guilty of it. You win the fight, you sit back and say, thank goodness for that. You'll go home, sit down, put your feet up, have a cup of tea, watch the telly. It's all fine now. Complacency is the worst enemy of all. And secondly, there's the council itself. The council itself, which could be very, very anti-democratic, could be very ignoring of public views or disinterested, like when it went to sell the Downs. It didn't consult you, your Downs, about selling it. They just 6 people said, we're going to flog it off. So both the council need to basically communicate with the public more, and you, the people of Eastbourne who owns the Downs, need to get hold of the council. And it'd be much more helpful if there was a ranger or some member of staff actually on the ground. Anyway, lobby for that. There is an Eastbourne Downland Forum, but that's only made up of a representative of half a dozen different organisations like Eastbourne Downland Group, Sussex Wildlife Trust and 1 or 2 others. So that's if you know your contact there, Eastbourne Society, Eastbourne Downland Group, talk to them and get them to influence through that forum. But it's, as I said, it's your council, your Downs, your choice. Okay, thank you very much.